The wind off Lake Michigan howled like a living thing that winter, curling around the old brick apartment building on the corner of Wabash Avenue. Snow piled high against the doors, trapping the last few tenants inside. The power flickered, then died, leaving only the amber glow of candles behind dusty windows. In one of those rooms sat Evelyn, her hands wrapped in a blanket, her knees aching from years of arthritis that had stolen her dancing. Across the hall, Frank, once a mechanic with a laugh that used to shake the rafters of his old garage, stared at the faded photo of his late wife. Two people, two lives paused by time, both quietly waiting for spring that never seemed to come. But sometimes the universe doesn't send warmth through sunlight, it sends it through another soul. When the pipes burst that night, flooding the hallway with cold water, Frank went knocking from door to door, and when Evelyn opened hers, something old stirred. Not recognition, but resonance, the kind that only loneliness can recognize. They didn't know yet that the storm outside would last for days, or that the power outage would seal them together inside the frozen building. They didn't know that they were about to share soup by candlelight, or that laughter, forgotten laughter, would return like music to the silence. Because sometimes, love does not arrive with fireworks or youth, but with the soft whisper of two tired hearts finding rhythm again. Love stories are usually told with young faces, bright lights, and first times. But this one begins with wrinkles, silence, and the second chances we almost stop believing in. Before we begin, if this story finds a place in you, if you still believe that love can come back even after everything, hit like, subscribe, and comment the city and state you're watching from. That's how I know where these stories are finding their way. In Chicago, during one of the harshest winters of the late 20th century, two strangers living across the same dim hallway discover something they thought had ended long ago, the feeling of being seen. Evelyn, once the brightest dancer in the community theatre, now moves with pain and hesitation. Frank, who spent decades repairing engines and raising a family, moves with the heaviness of loss. Their world has shrunk to the walls of a lonely apartment building where neighbors nod but never speak, where mail piles up, and where the sound of radiators replaces conversation. When the snowstorm traps them inside, time itself slows down. The isolation forces them to look outward and inward. The scent of coffee becomes a bridge between doors. The flicker of a candle under Evelyn's door becomes a beacon Frank follows. Each small moment, a shared laugh, a story of who they were, becomes a defiance against the cold. This is not a story about growing old. It's about growing back into life after believing that love has already passed you by. It's about how even frozen hearts can thaw when touched with kindness. The storm had arrived in the dead of night without warning, turning Chicago's heartbeat into a muffled hush beneath white drifts. Streetlights flickered through the falling snow like fading stars. Inside the old red brick apartment building, time felt suspended, a world sealed in ice. Evelyn woke to the sound of the wind scraping against the window pane, the radiators hissing weakly. Her joints throbbed, the pain sharp and familiar, and she reached for the small jar of ointment on her nightstand. The walls groaned, the lights dimmed, and she realized with a sigh that the power was failing again. Across the hallway, Frank stirred in his chair by the window. He had fallen asleep clutching a paperback novel, one he had read 3 times already. The radio had gone silent hours earlier. He could see his own breath in the air, and the silence pressed down on him until he couldn't stand it. He reached for his coat and flashlight, muttering, "Pipes will freeze if I don't check the basement." But when he opened his door, the hallway floor was already slick with ice water. A burst pipe. He cursed under his breath, the kind of word that tasted old and heavy, and knocked on the nearest door. Evelyn opened it, wrapped in a shawl, her grey hair undone. Their eyes met, strangers bound by the same cold. He apologized, explaining about the pipe, and she nodded, grabbing a bucket to help. Together, they worked by candlelight, bailing water in silence. It wasn't grace or destiny, just two people doing what needed to be done. But as their hands brushed over the same bucket handle, both froze for a moment longer than necessary. The wind screamed outside, but inside that hallway, something fragile began to hum. By morning, the storm had deepened. The roads vanished beneath white dunes, and the city warned everyone to stay inside. Frank brewed instant coffee on a small camping stove, its flame the only source of warmth in the dark apartment. He remembered Evelyn's trembling hands and thought about offering her a cup. But pride, that old companion, made him hesitate. What would he even say? He hadn't spoken more than a few sentences to anyone in days. Down the hall, Evelyn sat on her couch, wrapped in blankets, staring at her worn ballet shoes resting on a shelf. They looked like relics from another life, one filled with light, applause, and motion. Now, even walking to the kitchen felt like a performance. Her stomach rumbled, but she ignored it, listening to the sound of the wind and, faintly, the soft metallic clinking of something. It was Frank, struggling with a wrench again. She smiled. The man was still trying to fix the world, one broken thing at a time. A knock came at her door. She flinched, heart racing. No one ever knocked. When she opened it, Frank stood there holding 2 steaming mugs, his breath visible in the cold air. "Coffee," he said simply, "and maybe some company if you don't mind." She took the mug with trembling fingers. "Only if you promise not to fix anything else tonight," he chuckled. "Can't promise that." For the first time in years, laughter filled the building. Soft but steady, like the hum of a generator sparking back to life. That night, as snow buried the streets outside, they sat near the window, watching flakes drift through the dim light. Evelyn told him about her dancing days, about the stage lights and velvet curtains, the ache of applause. Frank listened quietly, nodding, his calloused hands folded on his knees. When she asked about his wife, he hesitated, then spoke of love, of long drives and late-night repairs, of loss. Neither noticed how close they'd drawn together until the candle guttered, leaving only their silhouettes against the glass. Outside, Chicago slept under snow. Inside, 2 hearts began to remember what warmth felt like. By the 3rd day of the storm, the world beyond the frosted windows had disappeared entirely. Streets were blanketed under snow thick enough to swallow cars whole, and the radio whispered of blackouts stretching across the city. But inside that crumbling apartment building, life was quietly returning. Evelyn and Frank had fallen into a rhythm, trading coffee for soup, stories for silence, and silences for something that began to feel like peace. Evelyn noticed the way Frank's shoulders relaxed each time he crossed her doorway, how his rough hands handled her porcelain cups, as though they were fragile memories. He told her about his years in the garage, about grease beneath his nails that never really came out, about the smell of oil and rain on hot pavement. She told him about music, about how sound once carried her body through the air, and how silence had been her heaviest burden since she stopped dancing. That morning, as Frank tinkered with the heating system, Evelyn leaned against the wall and watched him. "You know," she said softly, "you look like you're fixing more than pipes." He looked up, a grin ghosting across his weathered face. "Maybe I just like being useful again." She smiled. "Maybe I like letting someone help for once." It wasn't flirtation, not yet. It was recognition. 2 lives long postponed finding the courage to be seen again. Outside, the wind howled against the building, but inside, the air had changed. Warmth seeped through the cracks, not from the heater, but from something older, something deeply human. That night, Evelyn brought her old record player into the hall. The storm had quieted, and the silence felt too large. She wound it gently, and a crackling waltz filled the corridor. Faint, imperfect, but alive. Frank emerged from his apartment, drawn by the sound. "I didn't know anyone still played records," he said. "I didn't know anyone still listened," she replied, eyes glinting beneath the candlelight. He hesitated. Then, with awkward politeness, he extended his hand. "May I?" Her breath caught. The joints in her fingers protested as she placed her hand in his. But when they began to move, slow, careful steps between the flickering shadows, something miraculous happened. Her pain, the stiffness, the weight of years, all of it seemed to lift for a moment. The dance wasn't graceful, but it was honest. It was 2 souls remembering how to move. When the song ended, they stood still, breathing in the faint scent of candle wax and dust. Neither spoke. Some silences are too sacred to fill. Later, Frank found himself unable to sleep. He sat by the window, watching the city lights blink through the storm's veil. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking of loss. He was thinking of her laughter, soft, unguarded, and the warmth that had returned to his chest. Yet beneath it, an ache stirred. Guilt. His wife's photograph still stood on the table, eyes forever smiling, frozen in the past. He whispered into the dark, "I didn't mean to forget." Down the hall, Evelyn lay awake, hand resting over her heart. She hadn't felt that steady rhythm in so long. And yet, with it came fear, the kind that visits when something precious begins to bloom after years of drought. Could she dare to hope again? Outside, the snow stopped. Inside, something deeper began to thaw. The storm had ended, but the silence it left behind was heavier than before. The city outside was buried under white hills, the streets glistening like a frozen sea beneath the pale winter sun. The building creaked back to life, pipes hissing, old walls sweating with melted frost. Yet Evelyn and Frank remained caught in a strange pause between comfort and fear, that fragile place where something beautiful begins to grow, and the ghosts of yesterday rise to test it. Frank spent the morning fixing a broken radiator in the basement. The metal burned his palms, but he didn't mind. Every sound, every clang, every hiss reminded him that he was still useful, still capable of keeping something alive. When he returned upstairs, Evelyn was waiting in the hallway with 2 steaming bowls of soup. "Payment," she said with a smile, handing him one. He chuckled, wiping his hands. "Careful, you'll spoil me." She tilted her head. "Maybe you deserve to be spoiled for once." The words hung between them, too heavy for laughter, too soft for retreat. For a moment, Frank forgot the weight of 10 winters spent alone. He saw only her, the fine lines that deepened when she smiled, the faint scent of lavender and old books. But then his gaze fell to the photograph he carried in his jacket, his wife's face, still haunting him with the warmth of another life. He turned away. "I should check the boiler again." And just like that, the invisible wall returned. That evening, Evelyn sat by her window, watching the snow glisten under the streetlight. Loneliness, once a quiet companion, now stung. She thought about her youth, the stages, the applause, the dizzying joy of spinning under lights. She thought about the accident that ended it all, the years spent teaching children how to dance when she could barely walk herself. She had told no one about the letters she wrote to her younger self, tucked away in an old shoebox under the bed. Letters that always began with the same line, "You're still enough." When she heard a soft knock, her heart leapt. But it wasn't Frank. It was the mailman, finally making his way through the snow. He handed her a small envelope. The handwriting stopped her breath. It was from her estranged daughter, who hadn't spoken to her in years. The letter inside was short, an apology, a promise to visit sometime in spring. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears she didn't know she still had. Later that night, she found Frank sitting in the hallway, the candlelight casting long shadows over his face. He looked up as she approached, letter trembling in her hand. "Bad news?" he asked. She shook her head. "Old news, finding its way back." He nodded, showing her the photo of his wife. "I've been talking to a ghost all these years," he admitted. "I kept fixing everything around me because I didn't know how to fix myself." Evelyn sat beside him. Maybe some things aren't meant to be fixed. Maybe they're meant to be carried, just not alone. He looked at her, and something shifted. Quiet, irreversible. 2 broken lives recognizing that grief doesn't end when love begins again. It just learns to make room. When her hand found his, he didn't pull away. Outside, the wind sighed through the empty streets, and somewhere deep within the city, a church bell rang midnight. Inside that old building, 2 souls finally stopped apologizing for surviving. The ice began to loosen its grip on Chicago. Roofs dripped like slow clocks. The river pushed against its frozen skin, and light returned to the city in soft, forgiving shades. Inside the building, life hummed again. Faint music from a neighbor's radio, footsteps on thawed floors, the whisper of new air through old vents. Evelyn felt it first in her bones, that subtle promise that winter could not last forever. Her joints still ached, but now, when she stretched her hands toward the window, she felt something she hadn't in years. Purpose. Frank was fixing a banister when he saw her sweeping the hallway, humming faintly to herself. The sound froze him mid-step. "You're working too hard," he said. "I'm dancing," she replied. "You just can't see it." He smiled, a slow, honest curve of lips that didn't belong to the man who'd spent a decade alone. "Then maybe I should start watching closer." Days passed, and their bond deepened not in grand gestures, but in small, quiet moments. They shared groceries, repaired leaks, laughed over burnt toast. But outside their fragile world, the city was waking up, and with it, the eyes of others. The landlord came by one morning, gruff and amused. "Didn't think the storm would bring romance to my building," he teased. Evelyn blushed. Frank only grunted, but later, alone, he found himself looking at his reflection in the window, wondering if he still looked like a man capable of love. Then came the letter from the community centre. They were organising a winter charity dance for seniors, a small gathering to raise funds for heating repairs. Evelyn read the notice twice before folding it into her coat pocket. That night, she told Frank, "They need volunteers," she said. "Musicians, decorators, dancers." He raised an eyebrow. "Dancers?" She nodded. "It's been years since I performed. I'm terrified, but maybe it's time." Frank's first instinct was to discourage her, fear wrapped in care. But then he saw the light in her eyes, that flicker of the woman she used to be. "If you do it," he said, "I'll be there." "You'll dance?" she asked. He laughed. "I'll try not to fall." The night of the event, the air was crisp, scented with wood smoke and promise. Evelyn arrived in a simple dress of deep blue, her silver hair pinned back with trembling fingers. Frank stood waiting near the stage, awkward in his old suit, his heart thudding like an engine refusing to quit. When she stepped onto the floor, a hush fell over the small crowd. The music began, a slow waltz, faintly familiar. Evelyn hesitated for one breath, then another, and then she moved. Each step was cautious, but filled with grace reclaimed from time. The audience saw a woman dancing, but Frank saw something greater, the defiance of age, the resurrection of spirit. Halfway through the song, she faltered, a sharp pain in her knee. Frank rushed forward, catching her hand before she fell. Laughter rippled through the room, soft, sympathetic, but Evelyn smiled through tears. "I told you I'd need help," she whispered. "And I told you I'd be here," he answered. The crowd applauded, yet in that noise, they heard only each other. Later that evening, they walked home through slush and moonlight. Their hands brushed once, twice, until finally neither let go. The city no longer felt so big, nor the future so small. When they reached the door, Evelyn turned to him. "Do you ever think about what's next?" He looked up at the stars faintly visible beyond the skyline. "Not anymore," he said. "I think about now." She smiled. Then now is enough. Behind them, the world kept melting, one drop at a time. March arrived with grey skies and restless wind, sweeping away what was left of the snow. The building that once felt like a prison now echoed with warmth, the hum of radios, the scent of soup, the rhythm of two lives intertwined. Frank and Evelyn had become inseparable, their connection quiet but certain, built not on grand declarations, but on the steady grace of shared days. Yet peace, like spring, never comes without the memory of winter. One morning, Evelyn received another letter. The handwriting was the same, her daughter's. This time, it wasn't a promise. It was a date. "I'm coming this weekend. I'd like to see you." Evelyn stared at the page for a long time, her heart beating unevenly. Guilt and joy collided like two seasons meeting in the middle of the year. She'd always imagined this moment, but not now. Not when she'd finally begun to feel free. When Frank came by that evening with his usual knock and his usual grin, she told him. "My daughter's coming," she said. "After all these years." He smiled, though the warmth in his eyes dimmed. "That's good news." "I hope so," she whispered. Something unspoken lingered between them, the awareness that family, once lost and found again, can change everything. Frank excused himself early, saying he had things to repair, but his hands trembled too much to hold a wrench. The weekend came. Evelyn waited by the window, her pulse racing like a girl's. When the knock finally came, she opened the door to a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and hesitation in her smile. "Mum," she said softly. The word itself was an embrace. They stood frozen, then fell into each other's arms. the years of silence dissolving into tears. For hours they talked, about mistakes, about forgiveness, about time lost and time left. But when her daughter glanced around the apartment and noticed the extra mug on the table, she smiled knowingly. "You're not alone anymore." Evelyn blushed. "No, not anymore." Frank passed in the hallway later, toolbox in hand, and the daughter stopped him. "You must be Frank," she said. "She mentioned you." He froze. "All good things, I hope. She said you gave her back her music." He looked toward Evelyn's door, throat tight. "She gave me back my reason." That night, Evelyn invited him over for dinner, just soup and bread, nothing fancy. Her daughter joined them, and the small apartment glowed with laughter and candlelight. At one point, Evelyn's daughter reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. "You look happy," she said. Evelyn glanced at Frank. "I am." Later, when the dishes were done and the daughter had gone to bed, Evelyn and Frank stood by the window. The city lights shimmered across the thawing river. "I never thought I'd live long enough to start over," she said. He nodded. "Funny thing about second chances. They usually show up when you've stopped asking for them." She took his hand. "Then I'm glad I answered the door." Spring finally broke through. The first rain came soft and cool, washing away the last traces of winter. Frank planted flowers in old coffee tins by the window. Evelyn laughed at how crooked they looked, but she watered them anyway. One evening, as the city glowed under a sunset the color of copper, she found herself on the rooftop, moving slowly to the hum of a tune only she could hear. Her body still ached, but her spirit moved freely. When Frank appeared, she reached out her hand. "One more dance?" He took it without a word. Together, they swayed beneath the open sky. Two souls that had been broken, repaired, and warmed by the same storm. Down below, the city buzzed with life. Up above, love remained, quiet, steady, and eternal as the wind. They never spoke of forever. They didn't need to. For Evelyn and Frank, love was not a promise of endless days, but the miracle of this one, the one they almost missed. As the years turned, the seasons changed, and life moved on around them. Their hearts beat with the same quiet rhythm they had found during that storm. Evelyn's daughter visited often. Neighbors whispered about the couple who still danced in the hallway on quiet nights. And in the building that once knew only silence, laughter became part of the walls. When the next winter came, Frank woke early one morning to find Evelyn sitting by the window, wrapped in her old blanket, gazing at the falling snow. She smiled when she saw him. "It's beautiful," she said. He took her hand. "Still think it's too cold for dancing?" "Never," she whispered. They sat together in peace as the snow fell, the same snow that had once trapped them, now blessing them. And when the first light of morning touched their faces, the warmth that filled that small apartment was more than sunlight. It was love refusing to fade, because sometimes the heart does not grow old. It only learns patience, and in that patience, it finds eternity.